If you had to move out from like your childhood home and you found yourself like in a new environment, in a new place, it's not just like the physical home that you have left. There's many little aspects of the life that you've had that you have stepped away from. Like you may not necessarily be able to like place it, but those small things were what gave you structure, gave you comfort, gave you like meaning.
No one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. This powerful quote by the Somali British poet Roshan Melwani really captures the unimaginable choices that someone who has been displaced and who's a refugee has to make every day. Welcome to Postcards, your passport to unseen corners of people, policy and politics. We have a really fascinating and a heartfelt episode ahead of you where we'll talk about the refugee crisis around the world, the cost of displacement, the mental toll, and what is really happening around the world for this issue. I have a wonderful guest and a very dear friend with me today, Roshan Melwani. Hi Roshan, welcome to Postcards.
Hi Nikunj, I'm so glad to be here. It's definitely a topic, displacement, that is very close to my heart, both personally and in terms of my own work. So I'm really excited to dive in.
And I'm even more excited because this is something you have worked towards, like human rights law, working with refugees and asylum seekers, working around the mental health side of things, which is really less talked about, but hopefully we can cover that in today's episode as well. And right now you're also working in the space of climate. So quite an interesting experience.
Very interesting intersection, but I think we'll have lots to dive into.
Yeah, so one of the first things I want to talk about, is like we met at Oxford, right? We were both doing masters in public policy at the Blavatsky School of Government between 21 and 22. And I've had Anish and Lucilla on the podcast so far as our friends. What are some of your favorite memories from Oxford, or what do you really miss?
Wow. I think that the thing that surprised me most about Oxford was that I joined the MPP with the idea that what would be the most transformative aspect of the experience would be gaining policy insight into skills, like new perspectives, new frameworks for understanding how policy ought to be better designed. But it turned out that actually what stuck with me most was the power of connections with people and the power of connections within our community for actually for making things happen and for transforming things. And I think that's what really has struck me most, actually. The power that empathy and having a understanding community can bring in actually bringing about change. And so those reflections are things which have been informing my own journey post MPP.
That is beautiful. I remember we used to do this series called Discomfortable Discourse.
Yes.
And one of the times you beautifully facilitated a space where folks were discussing topics around what we are going to talk about today as well, like what has that whole experience been like. And I remember Professor Joe Wolf, while he was teaching us philosophy, that was like the basis of what we were discussing.
It's I think when you're in a safe space, like being able to enter that discomfort is I think has been so much of a source of growth, and I think that with what we're going to be talking about today, on the one hand, a lot of issues surrounding displacement and the refugee experience entails very heavy emotional sort of like burden and very like traumatic and difficult things to just talk about. But on the other hand, like that the flip side of that is coming to build resilience, right? Like also learning from the experience of discomfort, there is hopefully the opportunity or potential for coming out, you know, on the other side stronger. So yeah, I feel in my own way, or in all of our own way, like going to Oxford was like an opportunity for that. Yeah.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it has been beautiful to see your journey since Oxford as well, right? But I actually want to start a couple of decades back, not giving away your age, of course, on the podcast, but
Couple is accurate. Yeah.
but I want to talk about, growing up,
Yeah.
your early childhood years. So you grew up in Hong Kong,
Yeah.
right? To an Chinese mother and an Indian father. So like a pretty mixed heritage that way.
Yeah.
So I actually want to ask, first of all, about, what are some of your memories of Hong Kong in general growing up?
Great question. So yeah, I have quite a diverse background, as you can imagine. I grew up in Hong Kong for most of my life, but I spent some of the initial years of my childhood in Canada as well. The reason behind why my family were in Canada was because I was born in 1995, and Hong Kong was handed over back from the British to China in 1997. And at that time, there was a lot of political and economic and social uncertainty about what the future of like the region was going to be. And because of that fear, like a lot of people like left the area because they were unsure what was going to happen next. So for that reason, like my family left to Canada, and I grew up in my first few years there. So interestingly, like a lot of my very early childhood memories were in Canada, but like since then, a home, like I would say for me, is definitely like Hong Kong. Some of us call it Hong Kong.
Hong Kong.
Hong Kong, yeah, exactly. I think the image I have of Hong Kong as a child was of a place of fusion. It's always been known as a place of like where East meets West kind of thing. And like my upbringing, I think, reflected that, particularly because, I felt that acutely because my mom was, I was mixed as well. Yeah. So I felt like I was in, I had one foot in different circles and one foot out at the same time. So like when I was interacting with other fellow like Hong Kong citizens, Chinese citizens, like I could relate to them in some way, but not like completely. The same with like Indians that I knew. And I remember as a child, like when I was 10 years old, I wrote a poem about this, about like how it felt like to be in that half space. And I remember I very crudely put it as like I referred to the fact that I was of like beige kind of tone, right? And my father was darker skin, my mother was like more pale, and then I was using some of this imagery to kind of like talk about how things aren't so black and white for me, and that I've sort of started to come to learn to accept the need to live in like all the spectrum of like gray that there is. And the poem itself probably was not that like sophisticated, but that's sort of the lingering memory I have of like, yeah, having to occupy these like half spaces between things. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, like that will be so reflective of a kid growing up.
Yeah.
But you're saying like, occupying these half spaces. So were you also like kind of afraid ever to occupy a space? Did you feel like, you don't belong to a particular space at times? How did you navigate different spaces, I guess?
For sure. I think that, with culture, there's always this sense of like, and I don't know how much of it is self, like you've imposed like an idea in your own head, but there's this idea that you of like belonging, right? Like there's various cultural like markers of when that you belong to a particular community, and I've always felt like I've had like some of those elements, but often like not that full set for a wide variety of reasons. And I think that like at times there's sometimes you feel a bit of a shame about certain things, like for example, my father was or my on my dad's side, the lineage is from Sindh, in what is now modern day Pakistan, but my dad left they were actually during the partition they had to flee their home, and they came and found a place in Hong Kong. And for the longest time, I always thought actually my father was fluent in Hindi. But actually only 2 days ago, I learned that my father couldn't really speak that much Hindi. Like I didn't even know this, but this was something my mom told me. And so I was always carrying this shame in me that like, why was it not the case that I was able to speak Hindi with like other Indian relatives that I have? It's like, and that is like one of various barriers you might have to being able to resonate with your own, your own kind of like heritage or identity. And yeah, there's like these things like this, which, only with time you start to understand like your own identity and like the position you have, and like, yeah, what were the factors that has made you become like who you are. And so, like I'm learning to embrace it though. I'm embracing the fact that, and I think increasingly in this world today, like you have people who've had all these experiences in different places, and there's probably a lot in common in that difference as well. So trying to find that, I think, is the way I'm trying to like process, those differences.
And it looks like even your family had to go through a displacement during partition, right?
Yeah.
When in 1947, they kind of moved away from Pakistan and then went all the way to Hong Kong, tried to build a family there.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, your dad met your mom there as well.
Yeah.
Did your dad or mom share some of the challenges growing up, like, in building a new home? What was their experience like? Some of the struggles they faced on it, or maybe some like, shoots of hope in an everyday as well.
For sure. Like, displacement has been a theme in like my family's story on both sides. So on my dad's side, they left Sindh in and around the partition, and they originally found themselves in Mumbai, but again, couldn't find themselves at home there, and ultimately settled in Hong Kong. I don't have that many memories of like actually interacting with my grandfather, because he passed away before I was even born.
Right.
And my father also passed when I was like quite young. But I remember my mom telling me stories of how like when my grandfather first came to Hong Kong for years, he basically lived under a flyover, just essentially trying to trying to get accustomed to a completely like new culture. But from there was able to make a name for himself or a living for himself in as many Sindhis do, like in the kind of like the import-export business, kind of like creating those ties between India and Hong Kong. And that was what he ended up kind of like doing to kind of make a living and provide for his family there. On my mom's side, it was the same, because my grandparents on my mom's side were both like living in villages in in China, in like Fujian province. And this was a time when Mao Zedong came to power, when they were
Right.
like quite young, and so this was a time of like the Great Leap Forward and like the Cultural Revolution. So I remember like when I would sleep with my grandparents, like as a child in their home, like they would tell me stories about like if they were able to find like some like crickets or some kind of like little insects in the grass, like that was fantastic, because that was like sustenance.
Wow.
Like that was like, yeah, it was like, that was great, because otherwise like they were having to like consume all kinds of things that weren't really like like edible in order to just survive. So they also left quite young to Hong Kong in the hope of like a better life. My grandfather snuck under a boat and kind of came into Hong Kong illegally, and my grandmother met my grandfather because they had a mutual connection of like a teacher, and that teacher just said, "Oh, go meet this guy. Like he'll kind of like sort you out." And that's, I guess, how things happened back in this day. They'll just find a way to meet each other, and yeah, the rest is history. But that kind of undercurrent of like displacement has been something which features on both sides of my family. Yeah.
Wow. I think I'm taking quite a few things from your journeys, like how your early experiences growing up shaped your passion for the space,
Yeah.
and also how you were also finding these legal and political tools to kind of put diplomatic pressure, kind of figure out other things as well while you're at it. However, something that you mentioned was also about the sense of community, this community coming together, helping each other, in different ways in this difficult time.
Yeah.
Do you remember an anecdote, any anecdote, then which like, community unexpectedly and in a very beautiful way just came together for each other?
Yeah. There were definitely people in my life at that time who stepped up in supporting my family during that like very difficult time. So when I was like in those years as a teenager, I remember like my mom found comfort in going, like attending church, and she found a community of people there who were willing to host us, who like wanted to give us a sense of community, like a place where we felt like we could belong, like a safe space, really. So I remember like people from that time who very kind of like there are actually lots of people, and many of whom like I almost feel like they are like family now, although we're not blood related in any way, but like who have generously offered their time, their their own financial resources, like to even put me through like university, like support my family, like just to kind of make sure that we could get back up onto our own 2 feet. And so like those memories like also really had a very formative impact on me. Like it made me have an understanding of like what is like the right way to go about like helping, like go about like how I ought to go about using my life to help others, because I guess in their own ways they were kind of like role models, and it was not like any grand gestures of like any, but it was like in everyday small like acts of kindness and support, in checking in on you, like understanding if we can like make dinner for you, like small little things like that, just to make the life more like smooth, and those things like stick with you for a long time.
No, 100%. And that's beautiful. I think you have also written a postcards to your future self,
Yeah.
which we'll come back to in a little bit towards the end of the episode, and we'll ask you to refer to that. And I will request our community members to like, share, and subscribe. Our episode have to do that, essentially for YouTube and Spotify.
Yeah.
You then worked in a law firm, Delhi and Associates, and you worked on other capacity building initiatives, right?
Yeah.
So how did that shape your experience? Like how you were thinking all this while about, you working on humanitarian law and other aspects.
Yeah.
And then also right now you're working on a climate initiative as well.
Yeah.
So how has that journey been like from there to climate?
Yeah. I will say that, this idea of wanting to be involved in work that, has impact, that has meaning, is something very dear to me. It's a core motivation. But nonetheless, I would say that my 20s has been a time of like exploration and trying to figure out in what capacity or in what in what shape or form am I able to best offer that impact. And I think working at Daly and Associates was that initial foray, just sort of jumping into the deep end of what that looks like. And I think even till this day, the work that I did back in Hong Kong at that time it has a very special place for me because it was my first real job out of university. It felt like such a privilege to work at a human rights law firm in Hong Kong as my first job. Especially given what had happened in my own personal life, being able to join a place that dedicated itself to doing pro bono work, for basically half of its cases, if not more, and really just focusing on helping marginalized communities in Hong Kong, refugees, victims of human trafficking, migrant workers, but also political figures in Hong Kong. That law firm worked on a range of social impact across Hong Kong, and being able to have quite a intimate taste of what that looks like on a day-to-day in practice, I think was a real privilege. Since then, my journey into the climate space now has been a matter of exploring different facets of impact. After having worked in the space in the law firm space in Hong Kong, I thought to myself, because of some of the systemic challenges that I was noticing for asylum seekers to get protection in Hong Kong, that was really the motivation to go to the MPP, to start being able to think about policies at a macro level, right? But at the same time, the MPP opened me up to so many new things as well, so many new areas of policy and impact, that it kind of also made me reorient my own thinking to explore new avenues, which I haven't had the chance yet previously. And naturally, because climate change is one of the biggest drivers of displacement, increasingly so, I thought that that is very, very interesting area or space to be in, to understand dynamics of displacement that I was not as familiar with, and so that sort of led me to doing my master's kind of internship or summer project at UNHCR, working with the special advisor on climate action. So really understanding that nexus between displacement and climate much better. And yeah, since then, it went from working in refugee space to working in refugee and climate. And then when I was there, I thought to myself, like, well, now I bet ought to really familiarize myself with like climate, because I felt like, I had that experience working in like refuge. So I thought, okay, now let me try to understand the flip side of this a little better. So that's why I'm currently at a climate nonprofit at the moment. But with a lot of things in life, I find myself in like it's like the things come back full circle.
Yeah.
In terms of like, what drives you and where you find like meaning and fulfillment in the work you do.
No, that's beautiful, and I think that constant reflection is so important.
Yeah.
So, Roshan, we have been talking about your refugees, right? And of course, we were talking about, the family, your grandfather or grandmothers who have to, kind of shift. But when we think about our ancestors 400 years back, 500 years back, we have no idea.
Yeah.
Due to war, due to economic conditions, some other reasons, they would have been displaced as well, moving from one part of the other. And the more we go back, the more common it is, at times as well. So being like a refugee or being displaced would have been quite prevalent, and their stories is just like lost in the annals of life, and we don't have any idea about that. But before we go further and dig deeper into this, how would you explain the term refugee to a 7-year-old?
Yeah, that's a great question. For all you 7-year-old prospective policymakers out there, I think you can think of the idea of like, a refugee as someone who, who has been forced to leave their home. They have had to leave their home because, they're afraid. Something has happened in their life which has meant that they have to leave their home. So maybe, for example, like there's a war, or maybe there's been like a big fire because someone like it doesn't like your family, right? And as a result, like the home that you're living in, suddenly you can't live in that home anymore, and so now you need to go somewhere else to find a new home. But it's not easy to find like that new home. You don't really know where that home is going to be. And so, a refugee is someone who's had to leave, forced to leave their home, and is trying to find home somewhere else now, because where they are from is they can't go back, they can't go back to that place.
Right.
Yeah.
And talking about home, right, and not being able to go back to that place, it involves migration, right?
Yes.
Moving from one space to other.
Yeah.
And often how migration is, showed or depicted in popular media or in news or anywhere else, particularly in global north, it shows it a journey from conflict to asylum directly. Yeah. But it's not so straightforward, right? No. There are a lot of things in between. A lot of experiences that we can't even think about. So in your experience, what are some of these misconceptions or misunderstandings that folks usually have? Yeah,
I think one thing that I'm mindful of is not to speak like I would want to like center like refugee voices like in this discussion, but what I can like speak to is like the experience of like working with refugees and understanding like, or like platforming their own like lived experiences that they have shared with me, and how that has informed like my own understanding and the ways in which like misconceptions arise from those who may not have been able to have these types of like interactions and discussions. What comes to mind is like, from some of the clients I've worked with previously, I think the biggest misconception is this idea that like migrant journeys are linear in some kind of way. A lot of the times, the way in which people end up in places is very much a product of circumstance. There's so many factors in a migrant journey, and there's like an intersection of things to think about that determine the way in which like someone ends up somewhere, right? Like say for example, you are from like a particular like socioeconomic background, right? Your ability to decide like where it is that you like move, like that is one type of factor, right? But even then, let's say even if you're well off, right? Like that doesn't necessarily mean you now get to decide that, oh, I'm moving to the United States and having the American dream, right? Like I have had clients who, yeah, they are well off, but or were from a well off position back from where they were from, but it only happened to be the case that because they had to leave at like a very particular time, all of a sudden, somehow the only like flight or the only journey that was available for them was somehow coming to Hong Kong. Like there was never part of like the plan to like ever be here. And so a lot of the times, like people who work in the space in Hong Kong would say like, if you were a refugee, like why on earth would you come to like Hong Kong? Because we have one of the world's lowest acceptance rates, like something along the lines of 0.3%, right? And so, around the world, the global average is around like 29-30%, something like that.
So, sorry, just to expand on 0.3%. So generally, how many applications do you think you get in a year?
So Hong Kong's, like experience with working, like, the government's experience in interacting with asylum seekers, like it first came about during the Vietnam. Well, of course, to be fair, actually a lot of migrants from like China were coming into Hong Kong, and they weren't technically classified as like refugees. But if we're talking about like asylum seekers in the modern sense, the first group of what they called like the boat people, who were Vietnamese, like fleeing Vietnam when the communists like took over. That at that time it was like tens of thousands of Vietnamese like people coming in, and that was when Hong Kong needed to set up like some form of an asylum system. But since then, based on like developments in like Hong Kong's asylum like policy framework, the numbers of applications that have come through, like from what I recall, are in the kind of like several thousands. Okay. There have been like years in which those numbers like increase, sure. But not necessarily because suddenly there are more refugees coming in, but because of, say, legal challenges to the system that have found that the system has been unfair in certain ways in assessing these applications, and has resulted in previously sort of rejected asylum seekers having to have their claims reassessed. So those numbers or those statistics often don't necessarily like show you the full picture of what's going on, because it may be the case that the numbers that you're seeing this year actually involves a substantial portion of people who are actually stuck in limbo because their case is now being assessed for the second time, third time, fourth time. So like with these numbers, often the case is that you have to dive deeper to understand what are the like the realities of like the asylum experience and the traumas that are kind of occurring in that process.
And the emotional toll that these families are first leaving their life, their land, their memories, and so many other things behind, and then also now struggling to find roots in a new place.
For sure, yeah.
And in all of these, were there any accounts or anything that really stayed with you? And in that moment, you feel like you just don't know what's happening in this world. How can this be the case?
Like with a lot of like clients I've worked with, on the one hand, like it's always important to like keep their confidentiality, because like they have for one reason or another may have done things which like are like the government are still actively looking for them. But like there are definitely stories of clients that I've worked with which paint a picture of like governments around the world which don't exactly match with the outward PR of what that country is like for people, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, and so yeah, like, you know, I think, I don't know to what extent it's like a common theme like across different countries, but you know, when someone has done things that like could potentially put like, you know, like government officials at risk, or like you know, threaten like threaten entrenched interests in certain ways, like I have been like shocked by some of the accounts of the stories of people's lives, of how they have still been being persecuted by their country, even not even necessarily in their country, but even still afterwards, even after where they're supposedly safe, still actually not fully being safe yet. Yeah.
No, oh, yeah, I think, yeah, I don't even know how to react to that. But just building on to what you just said, right? Like, I think this also begets a lot of fear mongering, right?
Yeah.
Particularly in some of the wealthier nations where there's a whole narrative of, you know, like, oh, so many refugees are coming in, you know, they're taking away everything, right? And all of this kind of comes, you know, from a lot of lens, you know, this fear, but data suggests otherwise. You know, for example, there was this European migrant crisis in 2015, you know, and Europe collectively took like what, 1 million refugees, while the neighbors of those affected regions, like the countries over there, or you know, in global south, were taking way more. Like, you know, Turkey took like 3.5 million. Lebanon had a quarter of its population made up of refugees, right? So where did this whole narrative comes from, you know, and like, you know, what is actually the impact of this?
Yeah, I mean, in many like developed countries around the world, like I think making asylum seekers like scapegoats for society's problems is an easy way out in addressing real like policy like problems. You know, it's like a migrant is someone who is already in a vulnerable position, and making them be the ones who we pin all our problems on is just, it's a easy heuristic that can be manipulated to then to then create like a hostile like environment and like a policy environment for asylum seekers, refugees. It's often the case in many countries, like that the percentage of migrants coming in who are seeking asylum is actually often a very tiny percentage of like the overall number of migrants that are coming in on like a year-to-year basis. But policies are specifically designed to target them as a way of appeasing, like, you know, more, you could say, nationalist or more typically right-wing elements of like society. And because it's such an easy heuristic to say, oh, these people are coming to take our jobs, to take our benefits, politicians are then able to get away with, you know, not say putting the investment into like communities, or putting actually putting like thoughtful like thoughtful programs to actually address root causes, right? So by just saying these are the people who are the problem, then they're able to get away with things.
No, I think that's so true. And even at this point of time, right, I think something that is there to counter the narrative is also like the economic benefits the refugees or the asylum seekers kind of bring into the host country as well
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But of course, like, that kind of gets lost in the narrative. But more than anything else, I think when you're talking about all of this, right, there's a huge emotional and psychological toll to displacement, right? I think there's this term that you only introduced me to, ambiguous loss, where the idea of a home kind of exists in memory, but you can't physically access it.
For sure, yeah.
I can't even imagine how painful or how inexplainable that feeling must be.
Yeah.
So how does, like, again, how does one kind of cope with such a kind of grief?
Yeah.
Which is so unexplainable.
Yeah.
And you're feeling it inside deep root, and then because you also work around mental health services, right? How do you help them cope, essentially?
Yeah, I think that for everyone who's had to, like, move out, like if you imagine, like, if you had to move out from like your childhood home and you found yourself like in a new environment, in a new place, like, it's not just like the physical home that you have left. There's many little aspects of the life that you've had that you have stepped away from, which like you may not necessarily be able to like place it, but those small things were what gave you structure, gave you kind of like comfort, gave you like meaning. Say for example, just like, oh, if every, like, in the morning at 7 a.m. you would hear like a particular like bird song, like in the morning, and that was when you knew that this was like, like the start.
Yeah.
And then you suddenly found yourself in a place where, you're now suddenly, let's say in Hong Kong, you're like confined by like bustling traffic in like a tiny little, like, you can't even call it an apartment, right?
Yeah.
Like, so many aspects of what was familiar to you at home as home are suddenly gone. Like, you are then operating or like living in a space which you feel like is like you can't, there are many things which you can't quite pinpoint why it is that you can't find yourself comfortable in a space, but because these are what are quite ambiguous, then like they carry a psychological toll, and your ability to, I think, emotionally regulate, like, to be able, like, there's, I think, from like, clients I've interacted with, there's like an undercurrent of like anxiety or undercurrents of like depression in trying to understand what it is that like that they're going through. And so I think that, again, from my experience, like often like homemaking or like is about like finding a sense of place or finding a sense of like community, finding a reason to feel like where the environment where you are in now, like is one in which you can belong in. And naturally, like, there's so many like barriers to that as an asylum seeker or refugee. And so a lot of like my experience of indirectly providing like mental support to refugees in Hong Kong has been in facilitating their ability to find work in Hong Kong. Hong Kong's a weird place in that refugees don't have a legal right to work. And so you can imagine, even after, say, going through a process of kind of, seeking protection, you may have been going through it for several years, some 5, some 10, even 20 years. Even then, after going through all that time and in all this time not having the right to even earn an income, even after being accepted, you still don't have a right to earn an income. Like, how are you ever going to find like a place, right? So there was like a legal challenge in Hong Kong that said that refugees can work if they prove that like they have medical evidence to show that like it would cause them to be like have like medical condition if they weren't able to work, which to some degree is slightly strange, because like it should almost be common sense that if someone wasn't able to support themselves, of course that's going to cause like some like, you know, the mental, psychological like challenges. So in that sense, like allow like helping refugees find work, so working with like corporate partners who are willing to like give like refugees that we worked with like a chance to employ them, as well as like NGOs, that like that experience of like trying to facilitate that those connections, and then seeing like those clients then be able to thrive in those spaces, was definitely like, yeah, like kind of like stuck with me, because yeah, like you can see just in some of the clients that I worked with, like the sense of like pride in the fact that they can earn a living for themselves, provide, like be able to contribute, after having, you know, been left in a system in which everything is they're always being subjected to things, like not having agency over the course of their lives, just always not knowing what's about to happen. Now that I'm being in a position where I get to decide like how I'm contributing, that has been something which I've noticed definitely like helps with yeah, like that recovering from the psychological toll of like the asylum system.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
I think when you were talking about livelihood, right, it kind of reminded me of Pachinko, where the lead character, you know, she has moved from Korea to Japan, and she has to basically earn a living for the family, and so she goes out and sets up a kimchi stall.
Yeah.
Right. But most of the people are not used to it. They're like kind of appalled by the smell of the kimchi. So she's not even able to find a space just to put up a stall right that time. And that act in itself becomes so difficult. Someone kindly said, oh, you know what, you can set it up here. And she starts selling it. And like, you know, and there's like when you're talking about pride, like she has so much pride in doing that. And I think thinking about that almost a century back, as a woman, she's doing that, right? Like I think so. There's a very strong gender angle where she's breaking those stereotypes that time and doing that as well, and fighting them first of all on an active basis, like those stereotypes. So you know what, it kind of reminded me of that pride, joy she had in bringing you know, that to the home. But talking about, you know, legal systems and institutions, you know, a lot of the times essentially. The asylum seekers or refugees are kind of, you know, trying to present quote unquote clean narrative or image, right, to the institution, so that there's a more guarantee of acceptance, for a lack of a better word. I think you can elaborate on that. Is that really the case, and how do they navigate that? And then on top of that, when the rejection is so high, when the right of livelihood may not exist, how do you, even if like someone like you, right, who's from that country, who's from that space, who's trying to maybe support them, how do they not feel distrust of you or the government or any institution for that matter, where they're trying to seek refuge, which is often keeping them at arm's length at times?
I think you pinpoint an issue which I was made to become like very like obviously very intimately like familiar with, in that when someone comes to like a new country in which they don't necessarily speak the language. They don't know how the system works. Like they don't have any contacts. Like they have no idea like who is on their side, who isn't. There's a looming threat of maybe being deported, right? You don't really know exactly like who, like even if you go to like a law, like are these people like truly there to like support me in my case, or are these people like some, you know, so are they people who are, you know, there to work with the government to somehow just, you know, expedite my claim and just send me back home, right? You don't know. So like that, you know, that there's that definitely distrust, right? Because, and not even like factoring in like perhaps the sheer range of like circumstances that in which their trust with the actors that they have interacted with has been broken in finding themselves in the place that they are now in Hong Kong or wherever. Like people, you know, often is the case that with you know, migrants who somehow get promised that they will be able to, you know, go somewhere and then actually are taken somewhere else, or how they end, like, you know, end up in like in being trafficked to one place or the other. Like how can you even trust like who it is that you are interacting with? And that was on the very first day of working at Daly and Associates. I had to become intimately familiar with that because there was a client who we suspected was a victim of human trafficking, and without any training like whatsoever of interacting with someone with this lived experience, I was sent into the room to take like, you know, like notes of like, or like to understand what support we can provide. She was like very like hesitant to kind of like tell me anything.
Of course.
And there's also, of course, like the gender dynamic in that like I was a man, and, you know, she had been subjected to like sexual violence, and you know, that distrust, like there's like multiple levels, you know, it's like, are these people going to help me? Like, can I share these kind of very intimate details of what's happened to me with someone else? And then I remember like I was told by a supervisor to kind of accompany her to like the police station to ask her to give like a kind of statement to them about what's happened. And then she like, just refused to go to the station, and actually had a mental breakdown like outside in the street, because I later learned to realize that where we were headed towards also was the area in which I understand that like she was like kidnapped or like taken back by the gang, like the trafficking gang that she had been forced to interact with, and that police station was in the premises in which that gang had been like operating in. So just physically being in that kind of area was traumatic for her. And these are things which you don't even realize, right? So that distrust is something that, like, trust building is like probably like the most key thing that you need to do at the beginning to understand like what it is, and like hold a space for like a client to just feel safe, you know. If you don't do that, like, I think the ability to actually meaningfully support them and advocate for them becomes like significantly constrained, because then they aren't even able to kind of like, they don't have the willingness to even share the narrative of what has happened to them, because they don't even trust that you would be able to help them. So, and then the problem with like many asylum systems is that because they're not trauma informed, there is this like expectation, especially, and it may not necessarily be like a written expectation, but it's like a kind of a intellectual expectation that you would be able to carry a fully scripted like a narrative of exactly everything that has happened in your life, and that there would be no internal inconsistency despite the fact that, like most psychological like kind of like studies point to the fact that when one experiences trauma, that causes like fragmentation in your own memories, right, as like a protective like mechanism. And so then I've seen it countless times where like, oh, you said that the car that kidnapped you was dark blue, and then this other interview you said it was blue. Is it dark blue or blue? Or was there even a car? And then especially with like in an immigration officer who may have like the imperative to not necessarily want to be granting you protection, like the line of questioning, if it's not facilitative, if it's not in legal terms what's called a joint endeavor, in which you are engaging in a collaborative fact-finding exercise. If it's the case in which like one is like trying to just interrogate you with like so what happened like here, and why didn't you say this earlier, and all of this, like in so many ways, like asylum seekers get like unfairly blamed for not having a fully consistent narrative and held to a standard which 99% of like humans can't hold themselves. Like, if you ask me like what did I eat for breakfast like 2 days ago, I can't even tell you like right now like what I had, so like the fact that you can now suddenly, and then imagine like if say you've had to be in the system like for decades, now you're suddenly talking about trying to recall conversations or experiences that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, like maybe often without like written record, or like how can you then like how is it even possible to maintain that like full consistency?
No, for sure. I think I mean, just remembering so much. And I would think like someone would also doubt you in case you remember something perfectly, because then they may say, oh, you have you have remembered it, you have like dictated it again and again so much,
you can't win.
That's a problem as well.
If the script is too perfect, all of a sudden, it's like something is suspicious going on here, that like you seem to be able to recall everything, like it's just really like, I've seen that as well. I've seen like that like you have that particular narrative, it seems it seems too perfect to be true, and so there must be something that signifies that you cannot, like that's also like that's also viewed as like a like, or has been viewed as like a negative credibility indicator. So how do you win in that circumstance where you have an inconsistent narrative? That's a problem. Consistent narrative, that's also a problem.
And therefore, like building on that and talking about like the policies, right? Like most of the refugee policies at the end of the day focus on the logistics, like the food, the shelter, transportation, but often kind of neglect the rehabilitation and like the cost of mental health towards that rehabilitation process. So like what can policymakers do to kind of include mental health as an active aid or active support to be provided in this whole process, actually?
I mean, it's funny that you say that, like, refugee policies focus on these items, because, I think it definitely varies from case to case, like, or from place to place, perhaps on the one hand, you can say where, like, provision for asylum seekers focuses on those aspects. It's like almost viewed as like an economic, like this is like a economic cost, like these are things we just need in place, but you're not even looking at like the human element of like things, so you just kind of view it as like part of your costing of like what it is that you need to provide. In Hong Kong, none of that is even the case. Like, if I remember correctly, when I was last like working in this space, it was like an asylum seeker would receive like 1,500 Hong Kong dollars, which is in in currency in India, like I believe that's like 15,000 rupees per month. And Hong Kong being like very expensive place to live, like that's, and it's actually not even, you're not even given that as cash, you're given that as like coupons for the provision of like food. You can go to get a supermarket and that sort of thing, but how on earth are you going to survive on that amount to cover all your needs, like your accommodation, food, like everything? It's like it's almost impossible, and yeah, so even then, when the focus on the policies are on like things like housing, shelter, that sort of thing, like I think what's ultimately like missing is just like not humanizing like the whole process. It's like you've people failing to realize that like it's like real people's like lives you're talking about, and like putting policies for people who, like, if you were to try to live on that yourself, or like to try to live under those, like the policies that you put in place, you wouldn't even be able to do yourself, so yeah. And unfortunately, because even the provision of just like basic economic things is already so abysmal, the idea of then providing like mental like support has, in most cases, falls far away from like government provision. This is when like NGOs step in, like charities step in, they take on a lot of this heavy lifting in providing support that like governments typically are very far away from being able to do.
Yeah. I remember watching this Amnesty video once. Where they were showing, there's a group of folks crossing the sea to go from Africa to Europe, and I think I never even thought about it before then. It's a very powerful video, and they show like just how important internet is. For example, just to make aware your loved one that you're here, because suddenly you're somewhere and no one knows back home what happened to you, or just like to even access basic services on the way, or when you have landed, or like so many of the things. And like Amnesty was making a case for like internet is a right now. It's a fundamental human right, and therefore it's so important for them to have it. Like suddenly the boat capsizes, how do you call for any kind of help, or you need something else, for example. So I think that standard definition of, I think what I'm taking away is also like that standard definition of what do you provide versus what is the whole bouquet of things that need to be thought of by policymakers is much bigger.
Like definitely. I mean, I think another misconception is like people think that like a refugee is someone who is like completely unskilled, like someone who doesn't know how to use any technology, or like has no skill, like nothing to offer. I've worked with doctors, like I've worked like accountants, almost most clients or most refugees I've like interacted with are fully familiar with like knowing all the features of like an iPhone, or like like a mobile phone, like. And so like I think for some reason when suddenly we talk about vulnerable migrants, we suddenly assume that they have lived a life that is completely not parallel to us in any way, shape, or form, when the reality in like such a increasingly connected world is that like there's so much more in common. And it's a shame that like that commonality is actually like lost, and is being used to kind of like create divisions.
And like you're talking about doctors and all, and I think it's tough for people to imagine because the stereotype can be so strong. But just because of how much has been written about Nazi Germany, how much in the movies, in the books and everything, and you can see clearly like so many of the asylum seekers are skilled workers,
Yeah.
who later on even went to places and, made the bomb,
Yeah.
contributed to being like doctors, or contributed, or even if they were not skilled in quote unquote, very high order stuff, built nations, built buildings, and did so much work as well. So I think from a whole asylum seeking process, right? And you can pick up a particular place, or you can talk it about overall.
Yeah.
What for policymakers, to change their lens, what kind of institutional barriers they should be more mindful of, and what needs to shift largely in terms of policies?
I think that one thing that policymakers repeatedly fail to understand is this idea that fairness and efficiency are somehow on diametric poles. That somehow if we try to have a more fair system, that would mean that it would be much more costly, or that it would become much more slow, and that we would not be able to more effectively kind of run an asylum process, so the push in many developed countries is we need to restrict access to legal aid, or we need to cut the amount of time that asylum seeker has to kind of put their claim together. We are not going to guarantee that that they're going to be able to have legal representation at a particular hearing before a decision is made, or something like this. There's many little ways in which policymakers have sought to just try to expedite the system without at the cost of fairness. And I think the short-sightedness of that approach is that if you create such a system that then gets challenged and is found to be unconstitutional, or is found to be depriving claimants from their legal rights in certain ways, to have for their claims to be assessed properly under due process and all of that. You then find yourself in a situation where you now have to go back to scratch again. You have to kind of go back, and you in many cases, if systems were designed fairly in the first place, you may find yourself having been able to more efficiently or effectively kind of process asylum applications more effectively, just because you're not making repeated mistakes.
Sure.
And so that's something that I think policymakers fail to realize, that somehow fairness is kind of something to be avoided.
Yeah.
I think that fairness is something which if you were to embed it into the system in the long run, is something which would actually make for a more kind of effective policy framework. I think the other thing that policymakers need to think more holistically about is integration, right? Not viewing asylum seekers as inherently a economic burden, but rather finding way to facilitate their integration into society, for them to be economic contributors, because there's an opportunity there, since people who have found themselves in this position want to make meaning of their lives, to have agency over their lives, and so if only if you had adopted a more kind of a humanistic lens to kind of provide them those types of opportunities, then and not create a societal environment that is so hostile towards these like marginalized groups, then might you be able to actually see that, hopefully, you know, you create both a more harmonious kind of like policy environment society, but also one in which you have then are made to reckon with like focusing on like the other big challenges in your country or economy that are failing to deliver on the promise for its citizens, and addressing those root causes. Then trying to blame everything on like a small subset of migrants coming to your country.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And we have been talking about at a country level, right?
Yeah.
But international collaboration can play a big role in just supporting refugees better. Refugees are often crossing multiple countries, or like there may be other countries who are able to better support or help as well in a lot of ways. So do you have any thoughts on it, how we can collaborate internationally?
Yeah, I think that like the way in which so it's quite a tricky one, because like the 1951 Refugee Convention states that like firstly that like like an asylum seeker can't be like it cannot be held against them for having entered like a country illegally. Because often if you're forced to flee, then you're put in a position where you don't have a choice. And so it shouldn't be held against you that if you've had to jump onto a boat to get somewhere, that means that your claim is inherently not credible. And secondly, it's also the case that it shouldn't be held against you like where it is that you seek asylum. So if, for example, like the country that you are seeking asylum happens to be the second or third country in which you find yourself in, like the fact that you are seeking asylum there shouldn't like that shouldn't necessarily be like against like your credibility, because there may be a whole range of factors why like you did not feel like where you were previously would be conducive to providing you the protection that you need. But yeah, in a lot of like recently, the turn that international collaboration has had in this space has been in actually outsourcing like refugee obligations. So like this is like most prominent recently with like the in the UK with like what was called like the Rwanda scheme, where like the UK government basically paid like the Rwandan government money for them to just to send the asylum seekers to Rwanda for them to be held there and to be have their claims processed from there. So it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. It depends on what is the, I suppose, like the objectives or the intention of like the type of collaboration that you're having. But I think in fostering, like there is a role for sure in like bringing stakeholders, policymakers, like civil society together to both, exchange like best practices, but also like develop again like frameworks for addressing the holistic needs that refugees that refugees have, and working together to create that type of like those frameworks to address things more holistically, whether that be in how we ought to be handling the provision of like legal assistance or psychosocial support, like having people come together to see how we can collaborate on these things. I think provided it comes with the right like intentions, then that of course can be conducive.
No, of course.
Yeah.
There's this PC game I used to play, which is called Papers, Please. Do you know about it?
I think I know it. Yeah.
I think it was one of the most stressful games I've ever played. So you are like a officer sitting at a booth, like an immigration officer of a sort, and like different people are coming into the booth. They're presenting you papers. I don't know. I think the country was called Kirkozia or something like that.
Yeah, you're right.
And the line was "Glory to Kirkozia" or something.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the game is trying to increase the challenge by like giving you more papers, more things to think about. Like now you need an extra stamp. Maybe you're managing 5 different things. There's something else going on. However, I think many of times it was just like, the stress for me personally was coming from the fact this person looks so great, so nice. They generally need it. Their reasons are so strong. And just because they have this one letter here and there in documentation or something else, I may have to reject them.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, it's still a game, to be honest, but like at least I used to feel that pain so much.
Yeah.
And also the game used to penalize if you have accepted so much, like, you will get a citation, but if you get like major citation, if there's a major thing, your family in the game will be sent to jail, or you will be sent to jail, or you may be kicked out, or so many other things can happen. It's like, I was just like, that is just, like, I never thought about the whole process, like in like, in that way as well. When
Yeah. I mean, I think the people who, say work in like the immigration department, they can come from like a wide variety of, like walks of life, and there's no reason to necessarily think that they're all evil. Like they may very well understand that the fact that they're dealing with very vulnerable people, and it can be quite jarring to know that you have a mandate or like a kind of like a policy, like a policy incentive to have to like reject, or to not just be accepting everyone, but at the same time knowing what the actual like cost of that is to in real people's lives, right? So that's something which I think is just it's so unfortunate with like the kind of systems, or like the kind of exclusionary logics that people find, like that they find themselves operating in, not being like being forced to do things in certain ways, because like that's just the system that you find yourself operating in. And I've definitely interacted with like I think lawyers, government lawyers, or immigration officers who can privately share their opinions on things, but nonetheless still have to go about doing their job, because it's their job to push what it is the government has requested them to do.
No, 100%. I think I'll personally recommend everyone to go and play Papers, Please. It's just like it's game. Such a, like, it lays bare some of the stuff. Like,
it's not a fun game though.
It's definitely not a fun game for sure. And like, we're moving towards like at the end of our conversation, I think, in a way. We're also talking about like everything that we've been talking about. I think one of the key things I've been thinking about is just like this idea of social acceptance, right? And how that social acceptance differs around rehabilitation, more so like along the lines of let's say caste, race, gender, religion, and so many other things. One of our last guests, Tisha, again a dear friend who works in the space of gender, she was talking about like how different identities experience marginalization so differently, right? And she made some very strong points, and I highly recommend everyone to watch that episode. So for example, when you think about gender, right, or you can pick any other identity, how does this experience differ in terms of, again, like social acceptance than around rehabilitation, according to you?
Yeah. I think that, yeah, the intersection of like, the wide range of factors that define like who you are, like definitely has like a like a like a massive impact in the ways in which like the dynamic of the interactions that you have with others who may not come from like the walk of life that you have. Like, so say for example, like I remember a client that was like pregnant, and her pregnancy was not considered a like valid, like, or going into labor was not considered a sufficiently valid medical reason for postponing her like her tribunal hearing for her asylum claim.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so like that is like one of the most egregious or like almost blatantly obvious examples of someone from a different like, like if you're not like, it should almost be obvious, in that case that like, like this person like actually can't go ahead with what it is that with this particular hearing. But imagine being in a system where the fact that you are in labor is now suddenly considered as being like disruptive, or like is considered as being like like not like a sign that you are kind of not engaging in this system like properly, so it's like that marginalization happens, I think, throughout the time, and even after after finding asylum as well, like finding protection as well. So very heavy, but yeah.
So, Roshan, I think it has been such a heartfelt conversation so far, and I want to ask you, like, as this conversation comes to close, some of the common questions that we ask basically all our speakers and the guests. So one of the question I have is like, imagine you're someone in power, like, very highly placed wherever you imagine yourself to be, and if you have to introduce one policy, any policy in the world, what is that policy you will introduce and why?
So this not fully costed, or like no economic analysis on the feasibility of this policy, but I think like the first thing that came to my mind is like free therapy for everyone. Everyone gets like psychotherapy, like at like like should they wish to, like or some form of like counseling or like support, because I think, and I'm mainly really just speaking from like personal like experience here, which is I think that like if we're able to live in a society which like just complete like destigmatizes the idea that it's okay to get like support for the things that you're going through, and that it's totally normal. I just kind of wonder like the type, like how much more of a compassionate, empathetic, understanding society we would have, and like what that would mean for the rest of policy making, and like whilst that is not something which is not a particular policy area, but it's like if at a foundation we're kind of going about our lives in a kind of like in a more grounded, embodied like kind of way, and like we better understand like ourselves and hopefully use that to be able to then be of better service or better support to others, like who knows what that can like lead to, right? So yeah, but not costed. So no idea. No idea whether that's feasible at all. But like in an ideal world, like that would be nice.
And considering all the conversation we have been having so far, right?
Yeah.
If there is this one message you want to leave our listeners with, what is that message?
One message. We've talked a lot about like a particular area of policy, displacement, asylum, and I think that like the hope I have, of course, is that this conversation is able to bring like some fresh insights or ideas about like what the refugee like experience might be like. I think the message that I would have is like see like go out, like see if you can take the time, whether it even be to continue to further like educate yourself, or find ways to like interact with people that you may not normally interact with, but interact with them in a place of like understanding, and like first of just trying to like absorb and listen. Like I think that has been something which I've found to have been like very useful like skill to kind of like develop. And if listeners can go away with that sort of openness of mind to in their interactions with people, and particularly people who come from walks of life very different from themselves, like then that would make me quite happy.
And finally, we asked the recommendation from everyone. So what are 3 things to read, 2 things to watch or listen, or 1 person to follow that you would say?
So funnily enough, before this conversation, before we recorded this podcast, we were talking about this point, and like I was gathering my recommendations, and the one that I came to my mind for reading, which I didn't even notice, was this book called Persepolis, and I didn't even happen to know it was actually right here on this desk. And actually, well, now it's hidden behind here. So this book here actually is it's a graphic novel. I quite like graphic novels because I'm someone who struggles with like visually imagining things. So when it comes to fiction, like it really helps to, although this is actually more of a memoir, but like it really helps to like really paint a picture for you, right? And Persepolis is a graphic novel about like a Iranian girl who I believe is sent to Austria by her parents in her younger years for kind of her education. But in that time, like the Iran goes through like a cultural like the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and so the way of life that she was accustomed to growing up, as well as like the new like Western kind of like mindsets or perspectives that she's able to kind of like observe and draw from, like that reality or that space she finds herself in is like now completely no longer the case in Iran. And so this book definitely talks a lot on like the experience of displacement, the idea of like in very real or like very vivid examples what that ambiguous loss like really looks like, for someone who has grown up in like this myriad of different kind of like cultural influences. And I think it does a really good job at like talking about or like really fleshing out like what like the lived experience of like someone who has been displaced, like actually like looks like, and it's so much more nuanced than many might imagine. And you might find that you are able to relate to her own story in ways that you may not have imagined previously. So this is very emotional, kind of like graphic novel, and I really did enjoy this book like so much. Yeah, it's a great sort of almost like unforgettable portrait of her life. Other books I recommend, there's a novel, sorry, not a novel, a memoir as well by this author called Karen Chung. She's a local Hong Kong author. I read her book recently. It's called The Impossible City. I give this recommendation really as personally because she talks about, again, like that experience of ambiguous loss, but particularly in the Hong Kong context. So and it has deep resonance for me. And so for people who are interested in learning more about like the way in which like life in Hong Kong for people who have grown up there has like changed, and it's written from her own personal perspective. But like the way she writes is also like very, very beautiful. So I would definitely recommend that book. And then finally, I think a book that I would recommend that recently I've been doing a lot of reading into like various modalities of like psychotherapy, and I've been particularly interested in reading about like humanistic and like client-centered like psychology, like psychotherapy. And a book that really resonated with me was this a book called Becoming Myself by a psychiatrist called Irvin Yalom. He's a psychiatrist who's based out of Stanford, and it just talks about like his journey into like finding himself. And I think there are so many like valuable reflections and lessons there, which really could be of use to your listeners. One thing that stuck with me was something he said, which is like you need to explore your regrets to have a regret-free life. And we navigate life through with like so many things that happen, and just self-examination, inner exploration, I think is something which can't recommend enough of. Did you ask me to suggest anything more?
Yeah. Hey, do you have anything that you want to recommend to either like watch or listen, and also
Cool.
like someone to follow?
Cool. Yeah. I would suggest there's another movie called like The Sunny Side of the Street. It is directed by a local Hong Kong director that talks about like the refugee experience in Hong Kong. The film follows the life of a taxi driver, a local Hong Kong taxi driver, and a Pakistani boy who's, I believe, his parents die in like a car crash. And like the way that the movie kind of like paints the lives of refugees and like minorities in Hong Kong is something which is not something that is widely available or seen in Western media, or even for like Hong Kong cinema. Like that's something which is very unique. It's the first movie that has ever been on this particular topic. So would definitely recommend that with that one. what else? There's for like listeners, listeners who are interested in Hong Kong politics in general. I believe there is a recent documentary. I can't remember who it's by, but I believe it's called "Who is Nathan Wall?" Yeah, he's a political activist in Hong Kong. Great, yeah, very fascinating documentary for those who are interested in like that side of like of Hong Kong's kind of political development. So would recommend that one as well.
Right. And is there any person that you recommend to follow just because you admire them or you feel like everyone should know about them?
Yeah, well, you know, follow these days has this connotation of like Instagram or like so some social media, right? But I'm relatively old school, like in my like ways nowadays. Like I find myself not using social media that much, but someone I recommend at least some kind of reading more into or looking into their work is I mentioned Irvin Yalom, but also Carl Rogers. I think what they've like the ideas that they've brought into like humanistic like psychology or psychotherapy has been very fascinating, and their ideas have been informing my own like desire to increasingly explore like what it would mean to be working in like the like kind of the counseling psychotherapy like space, and so would recommend them to kind of follow their like the work that they've done in order to see how it might be of benefit just even for yourself.
Wow, amazing. And finally, you wrote a postcard to your future self.
Yeah, I did.
Do you want to read that out?
Oh, here it is. Yeah. Yeah, it's it's an interesting one. I wrote this. I said, "Dear Roshan, how are you? I'm so curious to know what's going on in your life right now. Have you settled down with a family? Or are you still traveling around to all new corners of the world?" I hope the answer is a bit of both. I wrote this with the kind of like a curiosity about him without kind of any prejudgments of like what he is going to be like. But I then said that in whatever it is that you're doing, I hope that you have found yourself in a space of fulfillment and growth. I hope you continue to generously offer yourself in the service of helping those around you and others close to heart. I hope the flame of your 14-year-old self with his sense of idealism still exists somewhere inside of you, whilst balancing all the other responsibilities that must be going on in your life. Wishing you all the best and happiness. So very simple little postcard for myself. I think I approach it with just general kind of curiosity as to what happens. But yeah, I'm hopeful that staying in like a empathetic space towards myself and like my future self will hopefully be the like key to being able to like navigate like the world of like impact and helping others, and it's been a pleasure being able to be on this show, and I wonder whether my future 10 years self from now will be able to read this and how accurate this is going to be.
Or you come back and you read this post
that,
10 years from now
and it turns out no.
or yes, you never know.
Yeah.
Or I think one idea of being human is just constantly evolving
For sure.
as individuals. But I think it has been such a beautiful conversation.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you came on the show.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And
yeah,
and
it was
you
great.
and gave this space your trust,
Yeah.
your thoughts,
Yeah.
and like so many of your insights. Would always be grateful for that.
Yeah.
As I was always grateful for your friendship.
Yeah.
And continue to be.
Yeah.
And I think there's just so many things that I'm taking away from what we talked as well. But I guess at the end of the day, no one chooses to be a refugee, right? I think it's just about like lives of individuals who are which are so rich in their own ways. And I think it's not like how we take care of individuals, treat those individuals, or just generally consider them. It's not a reflection on our policies, but rather a reflection on our humanity at the end of the day.
For sure. Yeah, I think everyone should, most people perhaps don't realize that, you're always just like one or two moves away or situations away from suddenly being in a space that is that you did not expect, and I can speak to my own life, but the unpredictability of life is as such. And I would hope that people can be mindful and compassionate about that, because that's probably, it might be cliche, but that's the only way to kind of build a society in which we are kind of together and supportive of each other. So
no, 100%. And I kind of want to end with reading out a poem by this which was written in 2019 by this 12-year-old Syrian refugee, and just repeating 12-year-old, called Abdullah Qasim. And I'm just going to read the first few lines of their poem. They said, "I was forced to leave my country. They said it is for safety. I went quickly to pick a flower of jasmine, collected soil as much as a bottle of water, and hid olive tree leaf in my little pocket. I went out of my sweet house and forgot to take my memories and hopes." I think I can't thank you enough again, Roshan, for just sharing your thoughts. I'll always cherish, and I'm excited about what lies ahead for you in the future. Your passion for all things in life as well, and I wish you all the best. And it was really great having you on the Postcards again.
Yeah, likewise. I'm so grateful to be here. I think you're doing some really, you're holding quite a unique space. And I'm grateful just to be able to have been a part of it. So
no, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in. If this conversation kind of resonated with you, please do share it with more folks. We're always interested in hearing your feedback. So if you have any thoughts and comments, just put them down in the comment box wherever you're watching or listening it, or just check out our socials on Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever, and drop your thoughts there. You can always DM us if you want to directly send in something, or you can always tag us on social media and share this conversation further. And lastly, I'll be remiss if I don't share and nudge you to share and subscribe, and it just keep on supporting us as you have always been doing that. I'm always grateful to that. And of course, a huge shout out to the team in the background who has worked tirelessly to put this episode together. We are starting new communities, both in person, within the cities, and of course, around thematic areas like education, gender, and we'll be holding meetups for that. So do keep an eye out for that, so that you can be part of those spaces. And lastly, take care of yourself, stay informed, spread the joy, and always remember that behind every policy there's a story, and a story worth listening to. Take care. This is Nikunj signing off. Until next time.